I never thought I would see my son's blood on his Sunday shirt. The first thing I noticed was the red stain spreading across his white collar as he lay half submerged in the muddy ditch off Highway 17. His suit jacket was torn, his knuckles scraped raw. For one terrible second I thought he was gone. Then his lips moved. "It was Richard, Clara's father," he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. "He said my blood isn't good enough for his family." The sound of those words hollowed out something inside me. My knees hit the wet ground as I tried to lift his head. Rainwater mixed with blood running down my hands. Eli's eyelids fluttered, then closed. I screamed his name, but all I heard was the echo of my own panic. I drove him to the emergency clinic myself, following the flashing red lights on the horizon like they were a promise. The nurse at the counter gasped when she saw the state he was in. While they worked on him, I sat in the hallway clutching his wallet and whispering prayers my mother once said when my husband was sick. The same words came back like an old song, quiet, trembling, but full of hope. Hours later, when Eli finally woke up, his face was swollen and bruised. His eyes found mine through the bandages. "Mama," he murmured, "they pulled me from the car. 2 men. They said this was a warning." A warning from Richard Whitmore, the father of the woman my son had married against every whisper of town gossip. I felt anger boil through the fear, thick and steady like the summer air before a storm. I had seen cruelty before, but never aimed this directly at my family. Outside the window, the sky turned from gray to black, thunder rolling far away over the marshes. My son had nearly died for loving someone he wasn't supposed to love, and the man who ordered it all was still sitting comfortably in his mansion on the hill. That night, as Eli drifted into uneasy sleep, I sat beside his bed and made a silent promise to myself. Richard Whitmore might have money, power, and the law in his pocket, but he had no idea what a mother's anger could become when she was left with nothing to lose. The next morning, the sun rose over Savannah like nothing had happened. The air smelled of magnolia and wet asphalt. From my kitchen window, I watched the light fall across the backyard garden my late husband built before he passed away. It was a quiet life, one I had learned to love: early mornings, baking pies and biscuits to sell at the farmer's market, feeding the hens that still strutted around like they owned the place. For years, peace had lived in this small house, but after last night, peace felt like a memory. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Eli's torn shirt and the terror in his face. Richard Whitmore's name had been whispered in Savannah for decades. He was the kind of man who built half the city and claimed the other half by fear. His construction empire owned streets, councilmen, and even a few judges. To most people, he was untouchable, a man with a spotless reputation and a mansion that gleamed white at the top of Whitmore Hill. My son had fallen in love with his daughter Clara 2 years ago. She was bright, kind, and gentle. They met at a charity event downtown, and for a while I believed their love might bridge the gap between our two worlds. But money doesn't like equality. The Whitmores made it clear they considered Eli a stain on their perfect image. A month before the wedding, Richard called my son into his office and placed $50,000 on the table. "Walk away," he said. "You can start fresh somewhere else, just not with my daughter." Eli refused, of course. He told Richard that love wasn't for sale, and Richard, I suppose, didn't take rejection lightly. I stood by the kitchen sink, staring at the pale reflection of my face in the window. The woman looking back wasn't the soft-spoken widow the town knew. She was someone older, sharper, forged by loss and hardened by the thought of almost losing her only child. That morning, I decided one thing: if Richard Whitmore thought his wealth made him invincible, then I would remind him how dangerous it is to underestimate a mother who remembers everything. By noon, I couldn't sit still any longer. I called my brother Sam. He was 70 now, slower in step but still sharp as a blade. When I told him what happened, he didn't ask questions. He just said, "I'll be there in an hour." Sam arrived carrying a leather briefcase that had seen more years than either of us cared to count. His hair was white, his hands rough from a lifetime of work as an accountant for half the small businesses in Savannah. When he stepped into my kitchen, I felt the years roll back. It was the same room where we used to sit as children, listening to our mother's voice float through the house. He poured himself coffee, sat across from me, and waited until I finished explaining everything: Eli's attack, Richard's threat, Clara's silence. He didn't interrupt once. When I was done, he leaned back, eyes fixed on the window. "Do you remember what Mama used to say, Viv?" he asked quietly. The rich think poor folks don't pay attention, but we do. We watch, we remember. I nodded. Our mother, Margaret Hartley, had spent 30 years cleaning the houses of people like Richard Whitmore's father. She'd seen things: contracts left on desks, money exchanged under the table, secrets whispered between men in suits who thought servants were invisible. Before she died, she told us she kept notes, names, dates, deals that shouldn't have happened, all locked away in a small metal box somewhere in the attic. "You think she still has it?" I asked. Sam's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Mama never threw anything away," she said. "Someday, the truth would need a witness." I climbed up into the attic that afternoon, the air thick with dust and summer heat. It took an hour to find the box, tarnished, dented, but still locked. Inside were old photos, receipts, and handwritten pages in Mama's neat cursive. The papers detailed illegal land transfers and property fraud dating back to the Whitmore family's early empire. I looked at Sam and felt my heart steady. My mother had left us the one weapon money couldn't buy: proof. And if Richard Whitmore had started this war, he was about to learn that the past never stays buried in a Hartley house. It was just past dusk when I heard the sound of a car pulling into my driveway. Through the curtain, I saw Clara step out, her hair unkempt, her coral dress wrinkled from hours of crying. She looked nothing like the polished young woman I remembered from her wedding day. That night, she was just a frightened daughter carrying a secret too heavy for someone her age. When I opened the door, she almost collapsed into my arms. "Miss Hartley," she sobbed, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." I guided her inside. The smell of biscuits still lingered in the kitchen, but it did nothing to calm the storm between us. Eli was sitting at the table, his face pale, the bruises turning dark along his cheekbones. When Clara saw him, she covered her mouth with both hands. "Oh my God, what did he do to you?" Her voice trembled as she tried to reach for him, but Eli flinched. He wasn't angry, just broken. "Your father sent his men," he said quietly. "He said my blood wasn't good enough." Clara shook her head. No, he wouldn't, they couldn't." Then she stopped mid-sentence. The truth was already written in her eyes. She pulled an envelope from her purse and placed it on the table. Inside were printed emails, photographs, and a list of names. "I found these on his desk," she whispered. "He's been forcing families to sell their land for pennies. Those who refuse disappear, and I think he paid off city officials to cover it up." Sam leaned over the table, scanning the pages with a steady, practiced hand. "These are real," he murmured. "Receipts, transfers. He's been laundering money through shell companies." Clara buried her face in her hands. "I don't know what to do. He'll destroy anyone who stands against him." I sat beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Then he'll have to go through us first." She looked up, eyes swollen, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Why are you helping me? After what my father did?" "Because your father's sins don't have to be yours," I told her softly. "You did the right thing by coming here. And now we'll do the right thing together." The clock ticked in the corner, the sound loud in the silence. For the first time that day, I felt something other than fear. I felt purpose. Richard Whitmore had turned his power into a weapon, but he had just given me a reason to fight back. The next morning, a knock echoed through the house just as the sun began to rise. I wasn't expecting anyone, and neither was Sam. When I opened the door, a man stood on the porch wearing a faded jacket and a hat pulled low. A long scar cut across his cheek, twisting when he spoke. "Mrs. Hartley?" he asked. His voice was gravelly, careful. "Name's Derek Bennett. I used to work for Richard Whitmore." Sam stepped forward immediately, his instincts sharp. "What do you want?" Derek hesitated, looking past us toward the kitchen where Eli and Clara sat. "I want to make something right before it's too late," he said. "I saw what they did to your boy. That wasn't the first time Richard's men beat someone for saying no, but it should be the last." He opened a worn leather folder and placed it on the table. Inside were photographs, typed contracts, and old payment receipts. My hands trembled as I flipped through them: pictures of families crying in front of bulldozers, deeds signed under pressure, and letters from people who had simply vanished. "I kept copies," Derek continued. "Every dirty deal, every payoff. I figured one day I'd need proof to save my own skin. I didn't think it would be for justice." Clara swallowed hard. "You helped him," she said quietly. He nodded, shame clouding his face. "Yes, ma'am. I did. I was his enforcer. But I've lost too much already: my home, my brother, my peace. I can't carry this any longer." Sam examined the documents carefully. "This could destroy him, Viv," he said. "Tax fraud, property theft, bribery, it's all here." I looked at Derek. "Why come to us?" "Because Richard won't suspect you," he said. "He sees you as small, harmless. That's his mistake." He stood up to leave, adjusting his hat. He thinks fear keeps people loyal. But he forgot fear can turn into courage when you've got nothing left to lose. As his truck disappeared down the dirt road, I turned to Sam. The morning sun filtered through the window, landing on the stack of evidence between us. Richard Whitmore had built his empire on the backs of good people. Now we had the power to make it crumble. 2 days later, Clara returned to my house. Her hands were trembling, her eyes red from sleeplessness. She looked like someone who had crossed a line she could never step back from. When she placed a manila folder on my kitchen table, I knew what she had done before she even spoke. "I went back to my father's house," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He left for a late meeting, and I used the time to get into his private office. I remembered where he kept the spare key when I was little." Eli stood up in shock. "Clara, that's dangerous, if he finds out." "He already suspects," she interrupted. "That's why I had to do it now." Inside the folder were photographs of bank statements, handwritten notes, and a copy of a will that looked suspiciously altered. Sam put on his reading glasses and began examining the papers. "These are forged documents," he muttered. "He faked his own father's signature to inherit property that was supposed to go to charity." Clara nodded. "There's more. I found an envelope labeled retainer payments. It listed names of city officials, judges, even police captains, people he's been paying for years." The room fell silent except for the steady ticking of the kitchen clock. Clara's hands shook as she reached for Eli's. "He has a safe at the bank too," she whispered. "I think that's where he keeps the cash he uses to pay them." I studied her face, so young, yet full of the kind of courage that can only come from despair. "You understand what this means," I said gently. "Once we move forward, there's no undoing it." She took a deep breath. "Mrs. Hartley, I've lived my whole life under my father's shadow. I don't want to die there too." The wind outside rattled the window pane, and I realized what we had become, not just a family seeking justice, but witnesses standing on the edge of a storm. As I placed my hand over Clara's, I felt the resolve settle inside me like stone. "Then it's settled," I said. "We won't fight him with violence, we'll fight him with the truth, and that's something he can't buy." By the end of that week, the plan was in motion. Derek came back with his younger brother, Troy, a man whose eyes carried the same exhaustion but also the same determination. Together they helped us craft a trap that would bring Richard Whitmore face to face with his own sins. We decided to use the one place no one would expect: St. Andrew's Church, an old stone building on the edge of town that had been abandoned for years. The roof leaked, the pews were cracked, but its walls could still hold secrets. The Bennetts had installed a small camera near the altar, hidden inside a broken hymn book. Every word spoken there would be recorded. "He trusts me," Derek said. "If I tell him I've handled the Hartleys and need him to come confirm, he'll come. He likes to see the results of his cruelty." That afternoon, Clara stood by the window, her expression pale but composed. "He'll bring a gun," she said quietly. "He always does." Eli reached for her hand. "Then we'll make sure he never gets the chance to use it." The plan was simple but dangerous. Richard would believe Derek had captured my family and wanted to hand over proof. While he gloated, the conversation and his threats would be recorded. Once we had enough, Sam would alert the journalist from Atlanta, who had been waiting to expose Whitmore's corruption for years. The night of the trap, the church was cloaked in fog. The air smelled of damp wood and dust. We hid behind the altar, the flickering light of a single candle reflecting on Ellie's bruised cheek. I could hear my own heartbeat as Derek's truck pulled up outside. Moments later, the heavy door creaked open. Richard Whitmore stepped inside, his expensive shoes echoing against the cracked floor. Even in the dim light, his arrogance filled the room. "Where are they?" he demanded. "In the sacristy, sir," Derek replied smoothly. "They won't be a problem anymore." Richard laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "Good. Make sure the town knows what happens when people forget their place." I pressed my hand to my chest to quiet the trembling inside. Every word was being recorded. The man who had ordered my son's beating was finally condemning himself. Outside, thunder rumbled across the savannah sky. I thought of my mother, of her words. "The truth always comes for those who think they can hide from it tonight." The truth was knocking at Richard Whitmore's door. The air inside the church felt heavy, as if the old building itself were holding its breath. Richard moved closer to the sacristy, his voice lowering into a growl. "When we're done here, burn the place," he said. "No bodies, no stories?" Behind the altar, I could see his silhouette framed by moonlight leaking through a cracked stained glass window. Derek nodded, pretending obedience. Then he asked, "What about your daughter, sir? She's been asking questions." Richard's jaw tightened. "Clara doesn't need to know what keeps her life comfortable. If she keeps prying, she'll end up like the rest of them." My heart clenched, but I stayed silent. The tape was rolling, capturing every word. Then, in the distance, came the sound of engines, 3 cars speeding down the gravel road. Richard spun around. "Who the hell is that?" he barked. Derek stepped back, his hand subtly signaling us to stay down. The doors of the church burst open. Flashlights sliced through the darkness, followed by the firm voices of federal agents. "Richard Whitmore, you're under arrest for multiple counts of fraud, assault, and conspiracy." Richard froze, disbelief twisting across his face. "You can't arrest me, you don't know who I am." One of the agents stepped forward. "We do, sir. And now, so does the rest of the country." He tried to run, but 2 men tackled him to the ground. His shouts echoed against the old stone walls, mingling with the storm that had begun outside. I stood up from behind the altar, trembling but steady. When his eyes met mine, something in him cracked. "You," he spat, "you think you've won." I walked closer, the candlelight flickering between us. "This isn't about winning, Richard. It's about truth. It's about the families you buried under your greed." Clara appeared beside me, her face streaked with tears but calm. "You taught me that love could be controlled with money," she said. "I hope prison teaches you otherwise." The agents pulled him away, his curses fading with each step. For the first time in years, the church felt holy again. The same walls that once echoed with silence had finally heard the sound of justice. 3 months later, Savannah woke to a different kind of morning. The clouds hung low, soft and quiet, and for the first time in years, the air felt clean. Richard Whitmore's trial had ended the day before. He was sentenced to life in federal prison for fraud, extortion, and the violent crimes that had haunted our town for decades. His empire had collapsed like dust under rain. From his seized assets, the city built a new community clinic on the south side, Rosehaven, named after my mother. It stood as a reminder that even the smallest voices could change something big. That morning I was in my kitchen, rolling dough for pies again. The smell of cinnamon and butter filled the air. Eli came in wearing a white shirt, his bruises long healed, his smile easy again. Clara followed, radiant in a pale yellow dress. She kissed my cheek before saying, "They're opening the clinic today. We want you there." Outside, children laughed as they ran past my window, their joy cutting through the last traces of fear this town once carried. Later that afternoon, we stood together beneath the old oak trees by the courthouse. The same journalist who had exposed Richard asked me, "Miss Hartley, do you feel vindicated?" I thought for a moment, watching my son and daughter-in-law hand out fresh bread to families who had once been afraid to speak. "It's not about vengeance," I said. "It's about justice and about remembering that the truth may take its time, but it never loses its way." That night, I sat on my porch, listening to the crickets and the hum of life returning to this town. The stars shimmered over Savannah, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself breathe, knowing we had chosen truth over fear and love over silence.